In 1972 and 1973, a series of murders shocked Northern California. College girls began to disappear while hitchhiking. Two of the victims were picked up from the campus of the University of California at Santa Cruz.
So during the 1970s, the U.S. had serial killers, all over, especially in California. You had guys like Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, and the Nightcrawler. And then, you had the LeBron James of serial killing. I mean, he was 6'9", 300 pounds. You would have thought he ate the victims, but no, he just sexually abused them. Anyway, he was probably the most evil. So Ed's killing spree lasted from about 1972 to 1973. And over that time, he took 10 lives. But his killing started really early in his life, in his childhood, actually.
I'm saying I've wanted to kill my mother since I was 8 years old, and I'm not proud of that. It started with surrogates at a non-human level. Physical objects, my possessions, other people's, destruction of things that are cared about, and then destruction of things that are living on a lower level, small animals, insects, animals, and then finally people. It started coming to a head again, so I went back down. I ran away back down there. And then a month later, I'm up living with my grandparents in the mountains, and 10 months later, I murdered them. It made it worse to be on top of a mountain. I was literally on top of a mountain when it happened. And I sensed everybody in the world just stopping what they were doing, turning around, saw what I did, and are coming to get me. And I knew I was paranoid at that moment. I knew anybody that came up there and gave me a funny look or a fishy eye or quizzical look, I'd have blown their brains out thinking they were coming to get me. And if it had been in a city, I would have been a mass murderer at age 15. I would have killed until they gunned me down. I wouldn't have been able to reason my way out of it. I was scared to death.
Now, Ed and his grandma were in a little bit of an argument. So he decided to shoot her to see what it felt like.
Oh, Ed, what are you doing here?
Farewell, Granny.
What? Ah!
Now, when his grandpa walked in, he decided to shoot him so that he wouldn't see his dead wife. And because of this, he was sent to a mental hospital. There he was tested with a very high IQ, but was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. In 1969, at age 21, he was released and moved back into his mom's house, even though the doctors urged him not to live with her. He attended community college and worked several jobs.
And so he grew up to be known as the co-ed killer. Edmund Kemper was born on December 18th, 1948 in Burbank, California. At age 10, his parents divorced and he lived with his mother. He described her as abusive and an alcoholic. But I mean, she locked him in the basement because she was afraid that he was going to molest his sisters.
You stay down there!
As a pastime, Edmund would cut the heads off of his sister's dolls, and he would torture, kill, and bury cats alive.
Why did you keep the heads? Why did you cut them off, and why did you keep them?
Something out of my childhood. I could put it on an incident. I mean, my father chopping the heads off of our two pet chickens and my mother insisting that I eat them for dinner. We could say it was something that simple. I don't think it was. Now, my dad heads out back with a hatchet. I got on my bike and I tried to stop it, I remember that. I got on the bike, rode around the block. I was crying. I haven't talked about that for a lot of years. I'm sure that may have implemented something, that may have gotten something rolling, but along fantasy lines. But it took a lot of years of development along those lines to really get off.
And what are your feelings towards your mother?
My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother. And I watched the alcohol increase. I watched her social life drop off. I watched her get bizarre. She had terrible pain from her life, earlier life, her upbringing, a failed marriage with my father. I'm a constant reminder of that failure.
After years of hatred towards his mother, he decided to kill her with a hammer.
He then cut out her larynx and threw it into the garbage disposal as a symbol of silencing her.
So Ed, I gotta ask, why did you decide to start killing college students?
I was also involved in killing co-eds because my mother was associated with college work, college co-eds, women, and had had a very strong and violently outspoken position on men for much of my upbringing.
Because I'm like my father, and I don't deserve to know any of those young ladies. So here she is holding these little girls up there as too good for me. Very special. If anything, I was destroying icons. I was hurting her without her even knowing it. Again, it's that picayune, little petty, ineffectual, I'm getting back at you, but I don't have the heart to tell you what I'm doing. See? Why would I admit those things on a camera? That's embarrassing. It's humiliating.
And how would you select your victims? Were they...
I didn't select them. It was random. And it was also the development of the passion. If I was drove, they died. Like the last two victims. I was so pissed I'd have killed anybody that got in a car.
Even after police warnings against hitchhiking and an increased bus schedule on the campus, Kemper had no trouble picking up hitchhikers. Ironically, one warning advised riding only in cars with university stickers. Kemper's car had such a sticker.
So Ed, how did you manage to become virtually undetectable by the public and even the police?
They'd buy me a beer, I'd buy them a beer. Casual relationships, but I was poking around a little bit trying to find some things out. Like I said, a friendly nuisance. I got in the way, and it was deliberate. Again, friendly nuisances are dismissed.
How do you go about interacting with the opposite sex?
I wasn't impotent, but emotionally I was impotent. I was scared to death of failing in male-female relationships. Sitting down and talking with a young lady. I need to be able to really communicate, and I'm picking up young women, and I'm going a little bit farther each time. It's a daring kind of a thing. At first there wasn't a gun. I'm driving along. We go to a vulnerable place where there aren't people watching, where I could act out, and I say, no, I can't. And then a gun is in the car, hidden.
I diffused the situation as I drove up. I'd gotten practice at that. All that driving around, it wasn't rehearsing. I made a game out of driving around, picking people up, and later on I discerned that some people wouldn't get in my car because of the situation. I'm a young man by myself. It's unsafe. So I thought, well, gee, that kind of put me off. I'm not doing anything to anybody, so I want to see if I can change that situation where they'll want to get in and I can take them where they're going. Because I know I'm not going to do anything. And I got to where I could diffuse that situation.
At first, Big Ed would pick up female hitchhikers to practice talking to the opposite sex. Then he progressed to killing them. His first victims were Mary Ann Peach and Anita Luchessa. He cut off their heads post-mortem and then performed sexual acts on their heads. The co-ed killer murdered 10 young women and dismembered them by disposing their body parts into the woods or ocean.
How were you feeling while you were killing?
Well, you said especially the first two, which were very messy. It was a shock that first time. That horrified me. I did everything stupid, everything wrong, if I were trying to get away with it. It was just really, really dumb. The knife I fell back on, that was a fallback position. I was trying to smother her. That didn't work. And she was struggling against that and arguing with me about it. And
On April 23, 1973, Edmund Kemper fled to Colorado and confessed his crimes to the cops. After many years without punishment for his crimes, Ed was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. His trial began in October 1973, and he was found guilty of all counts. When asked by a judge what his punishment should be, Edmund responded by saying he should be tortured to death for his crimes. In the end, he received 8 life sentences and is currently serving them at California Medical Facility in Vacaville. He is currently 72 years old. Edmund Kemper in his lifetime claimed 10 lives, those including his grandparents, mother, and 7 innocent young females. He will go down in history as the most violent and prolific serial killer.